Okay, so we're at part 3. In understanding the mitzvah of Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am God your Lord. So we have in front of us is a section from a sefer called Derech Mitzvah. You can see it on the bottom line there. This is printed from It A Commandment, so you can see on the bottom line, Derech Mitzvah. Yeah. I'm just saying, you can see under the line on the bottom, you can see it says Derech Mitzvah, Shnei Yisrael Menachem Edelman Shalom Shachar, and telling you who the author. Yeah. So the name of the book is Derech Mitzvah. It's written by the third Chabad Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek. He's known as the Tzemach Tzedek because of his great work, which is called Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek is numerical values into our numerology of his name, Menachem Mendel. Menachem is Tzemach, Mendel, Tzedek. And he's the third Chabad Rebbe, grandson of the Alter Rebbe, son-in-law of the Rebbe before him, the Mittler Rebbe. And this sefer, if I remember correctly in the introduction, it describes when the Alter Rebbe saw the sefer, and based on that, he had to have been under 20-something, very young man, under 20-something when he wrote this sefer. And what it is, it's it's another name for the Time HaMitzvahs, the reason for the mitzvahs. And it's a selection of some 50 or so mitzvahs that he explains on a Hasidic level. Now, Tzemach Tzedek's language in general is not classic Hasidic language, it's a bit different. As I mentioned to Rabbi earlier, Tzemach Tzedek's Chassidus is kind of a bridge between the Nigla and Chassidus. And as we'll see here, the language in which he presents his Chassidus, and the context in which he frames his Chassidus is oftentimes, especially in Derech Mitzvah, in halachic context. So he's giving reasons for the mitzvah. He'll begin with the halachic context of the mitzvah, and then he'll put the Chassidic version, Chassidic/Kabbalistic version, in that context, in that framework. So it works as a good bridge for those who are not familiar with the Chassidic language and are more familiar with the language of Nigla, of halacha, or even Chatira in that sense. This is a good bridge. There are other parts of Chassidus that have different commonalities with different types of writing. A lot of the Rabbi Shab's writing has commonalities with Musar. A lot of the Rabbi Marash's writing, the Rabbi Shab's writing in the Contradiction, in his pamphlets, not in his Chassidus, but in the Rabbi Marash's writing, Tzemach Tzedek's son, has commonalities with the Midrashic way of thinking. It's kind of hybrids and bridges between different types of things. So this is Tzemach Tzedek. And one of the mitzvahs he does is mitzvah Salmanas Elokos, the mitzvah to believe in Hashem. So he begins with the halachic parameters, the Rambam, which we learned. We said the mitzvah, he quotes the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvahs, which says the mitzvah is to believe in God, as opposed to the way he writes in his book of halachas, to know God, which we'll get to in a moment. He quotes the Ramban, who quotes the Bahag that we learned, which says that the mitzvah, knowing God or believing in God, is an a priori before mitzvahs. So it's not one of the mitzvahs, it's what you need to know before there's a mitzvah, right? If there's commandments, there has to be a commander, and the first commandment can't be to believe in the commander, because who commanded you to believe in the commander if there is no commander, right? And then he quotes the Barbanel, and he quotes the Barbanel, I think, yes, just the Ramban, Barbanel, and he quotes the Zohar also, which also basically concurs with the Rambam that the mitzvah is to believe that there's a ruler of heaven and earth. You could see it in the line which begins the word HaTorah, Ad Kan L'Shanu L'Yanenu. V'chein Kasem Meforsh B'Rayim Hemna, so it states clearly in Rayim Hemna, Parshas Va'eda, Daf Chafei Amud Aleph, this section of the Zohar, V'zel L'Shanu, and quote Zohar. Al Pasuk V'yadayta Hayom Ki Hashem V'yadayta Ki Ani Hashem Elokechem, and you should know today that I'm God your Lord. So it says the Zohar, Pekudah Dal Kadma, this first commandment, the Chol Pekudin, it's the Kadma with the Chol Pekudin, it's the first of all commandments. Laminda, to know the Ishlita, that there is a ruler, law, a primary rule, supernal ruler. The Rebbeinu Olam, he's the master of the world, who bara alman, and created the world. Kulu, all of them, Shemaya Ba'ara, heaven and earth. V'chol Chilayon, and all of their hosts, all the things. V'do'yu B'chlala, Kivin Yod Pekudada, Ba'arach Klal Kedin Oilaf Lam Ba'arach Prat. Once you know that, you know all of the details. Keshem Elokim God your Lord, the Ba'arach Prat, and all the various different things that he quotes. But the point is that he agreed, the Zohar agrees, that there's a mitzvah to believe in Hashem, as opposed to the Bahag, which said that it's a priori. Okay. Now let's go to the next page. I'm not going to do all of it because there's a lot here. Where he finally quotes the Barbanel in justifying the Rambam's position, where the Barbanel says that the mitzvah to know the mitzvah that the Rambam says to believe in God is to believe that the God you already knew that's commanding you is the most perfect of beings. Right? In other words, the commandment is not to know God, because you already know Him, because He's speaking to you. The commandment is to know His nature.
That's true at that time, but in the future, the Torah has to be for all time. I was thinking about that. We can do that.
There is though that say that the mitzvah nechi is for future times. Yeah. But even so, in future times, you still have to accept.
No, it applies to for the present, but also for the future. Like the same thing. The Rasha will say, "What's the purpose of this for you?" So the Torah has to take into account the current and also the future.
It still doesn't satisfy the Bahag's question, because even in future generations, if I'm going to be listening to the Torah, then I have to, as an a priori, I have to believe that Torah has some divine validity. So to say, even in future generations, to say the first commandment is to know that I am the commander is an internal conflict, because if you are accepting.
You don't accept anything.
1 second. If you're accepting, 1 second. If you're accepting that the first commandment is to know that there's a commander, that means before you even heard the first commandment, you know there's a commander. Otherwise, why use it a commandment?
No, you have to know there is a commander, and then as a result, there's a Torah that follows.
Right, but if you don't know that there's a commander, then there is no commandments.
No, that's it.
It's the same internal question.
You have to believe there is a commander. Let's say
we know that. That's not the question. The question. Nobody's disputing if there's a commander. The question is if that's a commandment, and the counter argument is that if you are accepting already that there are commandments, then you've already, as an a priori, accepted there's commandments. 1 second. If you haven't accepted there's 1 second, commander. 1 second. Allow me to finish if you don't mind. If you're accepting that there are commandments, then you are ipso facto accepting that there's a commander. So 1 second. If commandment number 1 to you is thou shalt know there's a commander, then the fact that you are listening to that as a commandment means you already know there's a commander. Otherwise, why are you listening to it? It doesn't matter what generation you're in. Which means once you're listening to a commandment, it means you already know there's a commander.
No, first you have to know there's a commander, then there's the commandments.
Again, we know that you have to know there's a commander. But that cannot be.
We don't know anything.
Okay, whatever. We're going in circles. Never mind. It's okay.
Atheist doesn't know anything.
You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, but it becomes a.
It becomes a loop, which means that's right. That's Bahag's arguing that the first commandment cannot be to know there's a commander, because if you've already accepted that there is a commandment to know there's a commander, then you already know there's a commander.
Then it's redundant.
And it's a redundant commandment, and therefore it's a priori two commandments, no matter what generation you're in. That's the point the Bahag trying to make.
Yeah, but from the point of view, say someone's coming a complete, let's say, not lost person. What do I do? So first you have to believe there's a God, and then there's
right. But that's not the first commandment, though. Believe there's a God is a priori to the commandment. That's the point the Bahag is making.
That's the first step.
Who's commanding it? Who's commanding to know there's a commander?
Of course, there's God. Of course.
So how do you know that?
No,
so you already know there's a God then?
No, you don't know anything.
It goes back to itself. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We're going in circles here. The point being is that everybody agrees you have to know there's a commander. The question is if that's the first commandment, not if you have to know there's a commander. Of course you know there's a commander. The question is if that's the first commandment, or is it an a priori before the commandments begin? That's the point.
At any rate, you have to believe the commander.
We know that already. The question is if it's a commandment. The bottom line is that Rabbi says, in explaining the Rambam's view why it's a commandment, we learned this yesterday, is that you already know there's a God because you're accepting there's a commandment, which means you already know there's a commander. The first commandment is, okay, this commander that you believe is speaking to you is commanding you to know that he, the commander, is the most perfect of beings. That's what the Rabbi says. So it's not a commandment is not to know that he exists, but rather to know the nature of his existence. And as we explained, it's that he's a mechuyev ametzius. He's an existence that the ultimate existence does not require other things to exist. He's the condition for which everything else exists, etc., etc.
That's right.
Okay.
He's the condition precedent of everything.
Condition precedent of everything. Okay. So now let's look at the Tzemach Tzedek commentary. This is the Tzemach Tzedek recaps everything we did there. The Rambam, the Bahag, and the Abarbanel. We did some other things, but that's basically what the Tzemach Tzedek recaps. So now, if you go, the line starts with the word v'kiyum l'chol nimtzayim chulu yoyin sham, and there's 2 dots, and then we're reading right after that. V'olam b'dvarav. V'olam b'dvarav comes from his words. Speaking of the Abarbanel, shetzivei amana, the commandment of faith, einal metzias hakel, is not to be. You're not commanded to know the existence of God. Ki al zeh, because for that line at tzivui, you don't need a commandment. Ki kfar yadanu shu nimtza. We already know he exists, k'mosh yisbar, as we will explain. Rakat tzivui, the commandment is according to the Rambam, according to the Abarbanel, ha'amana shemitzius hu'er shalom, is the belief that his existence is the most perfect existence, but you already know he exists. Now here comes Tzemach Tzedek's challenge to the Abarbanel's view. However, that which the aforementioned sage, scholar, explained, referring to the Abarbanel, the idea of God, of his perfection, that is the, what was the word he used?
Condition precedent?
The condition precedent. It's not really the translation, but it's interconnected. The direct translation of Mechuyev Metzias is, he is a, a self-must existence as opposed to a possible existence relying on other conditions. So he now derech Kabbalah, if you can use the Kabbalistic language, is in a different kind. You would explain these same idea in a different kind of way, as we shall explain, which I don't know if we're going to get to that today. But says the Tzemach Tzedek, even this fact that God is the most perfect being, for which no other conditions are required for him to be, even that ain't tzarich lamuna. Even that doesn't require faith. So if you, Abar Banal, are saying that you know God before the commandments, and the commandment just know he's most perfect, what part of his perfection are you talking about? The fact that he exists in and of himself? That you already also know. This is incorporated. It's in the knowledge you already knew. What did you think of God before? This God that you acknowledge exists, and then you're being commanded to know he's the most perfect, what did you think of him before you were told that he's the most perfect? If you thought of him as an existence that's conditional to other realities, then you didn't think of him as God. Then whatever conditions he needs, that's God. So if you believe that there's a God before you're speaking, then you knew he's perfect. So the question that the Barbanel is trying to ask, that someone is putting back on their Barbanel. Clear? Okay. No worries, have a good day. So Shekfaya Danu, we already know. Sheyesh Bar, the creator, Hamachaya Ha'olam, which creates the worlds. Umemeilen automatically. Shumuchoyv HaMetzias. And because he's the creator, he must be the existence that doesn't require any other conditions, because otherwise he was created by those conditions. As he himself, the Barbanel explains, this idea of him being absolute in his existence and not conditional to others. That this is the reality. So if that's the case, the Tzedek asks, so what's the commandment to believe in God? If prior to commandments you believe there's a commander and there's a creator, as the Barbanel acknowledges, which means that you ought to already know that this commander is the most perfect of beings. Otherwise, why is he a creator? By very nature of the fact that he's a creator, he must be a being that does not need other beings. Otherwise, he's not a creator. So therefore, what's the commandment to be? The commandment must be something that you didn't know before. So it says Tzemach Tzedek.
Or you can simply say that nothing about no, you have to believe there's a God. That itself is a belief, which everybody is aware of.
Again, we know there's a belief. The question is, what's the commandment?
Yeah.
I want to reiterate this again. It's not a question. One second. We're not questioning the nature of God. That's not the question here. The question is, what is the commandment? Right? Now, if we're going to accept the Bahag's premise that before there's a commandment, we know there's a commander, which is a very logical premise, that if you are accepting and you are listening to commandments, you are acknowledging that someone's speaking those commandments. Now we have to, and therefore, if the first commandment is believe in me, right, which means those words when God says, please believe in me, is something he's telling you to believe in more than what you already knew. That's the point of the Bahag. Which means, if God's speaking, and you believe there's a God that's speaking to you, what did you think of him before God spoke? And then what is God asking you to believe that you didn't know? Yeah. That's the question. And this is what the Barbanel adds. The Barbanel's answer is, okay, you knew there's a commander, you didn't know his nature. Fine. His nature is the most perfect of beings. Tzemach Tzedek challenges, hold on a second. What did you think about him if you didn't think he was the most perfect of beings?
But how could it be otherwise?
Exactly. So here comes the Tzemach Tzedek's explanation. Muni. The commandment for faith is Shehu Yisparach, that he Ram v'Niskav Lamaila Maila, that he is exalted and elevated beyond Mimadregas HaChachma, way beyond the level of knowledge, which is the highest level in Kabbalah, which customs as the Tzemach Tzedek himself explained earlier in the mitzvah of Nedardim. Ubechlal, and incorporated within this is Shehu Yisparach, that he may be blessed. Machayes ha'olam, creates the worlds, but here's the key. You already knew God created the worlds, according to the Barbanel also. You already knew that, because he's the most perfect of being, or he's the commander / creator, you knew that already. But what's added now, by saying that God's lofty and exalted, meaning to say that even the role that God plays as commander is not the very definition of what God is as himself. God's essence is even beyond being creator. And being creator is a chosen manifestation of God's truth. So you knew that there's a creator. And now comes the commandment and says, have faith that I'm even beyond being creator. Now what happens? In addition to that, what happens is, now that you understand that God's even beyond being creator, then the fact that he brings the worlds into beings, but Oifen is in such a manner, Shem Betelim Mitzis Gamri, that they're completely nullified and as of nothing, like Abedvar Hashem, in comparison to the divine word, Veruach Piv, in the spirit of his mouth, Isparech, Kebitul, like the nullification of Or Hashemesh B'Shemesh, of the light of the sun while it's still in the sun. Explain what it means. The light emanates from the sun. Now, the light as it emanates from the sun, to some degree, is surrendered, is nullified to the sun itself, because it relies on the sun to keep on emanating. But then there's a deeper nullification. Right? So that nullification is a reliance. That would mean that us as creation relies on God as creator. But now that we're discovering that God's not just the creator, he's beyond creator, so the nullification is not simply that we rely on God's existence, but that we are completely and fully consumed within his elevated essence, because he's beyond being creator. And therefore all of creation is not just that they're reliant on him, they're nothingness within him. To explain what this means using the metaphor of the sun, it's not merely that the rays of the sun rely on the sun to shine, but the rays of the sun before it leaves the sun is so nothingness that it's nothing other than its existence within the sun. And therefore our being, the creation, the beingness of the world, the beingness of creation, is not merely reliant on God, in that God keeps it in existence, but it's actually nullified within God's truth. And that's a truth you understand when there's faith that God's not just the creator, but God's beyond the creator. And that is the commandment of faith, says the Tzemach Tzedek. Now, which means, and Tzemach Tzedek goes on to say that the level of creation is not a level of faith, but a level of knowledge. How is it knowledge? The famous verse which says, "For my flesh I see God," and so this uses that as a springboard by which we analyze the nature of creation. We analyze the nature of the human being, and that gives us understanding of creation. And in the same way, a person instinctually knows that he has a metaphysical life that animates his body. This metaphysical life we call a nefesh, not necessarily even a soul, just a nefesh, even in the psychological kind of sense. But you have a metaphysical sentience about you that animates your body. So when you look at the world and you see it as one big body, you know intuitively that there is a nefesh. There's an animating force within that body, which we call in English God. And therefore, the knowledge of God as creator, as the animating force, is not emunah, doesn't require faith, and therefore doesn't require a commandment. It's das. It's that which you know, even if you don't understand it, it's something you know intuitively. And now let's analyze that a bit more. So if you go to section B's, lahavin, to understand there's a contradiction to our words. Eila. Why? We just finished saying that the existence of God in its perfect state, and the fact that he creates all of existence and brings it all into being in his life, is not part of faith. It's knowledge. It's a knowledge. You know God animates the world. In the same way you know that there's a life that animates you, and therefore doesn't require faith. And therefore the commandment for faith is to know that God's transcendent from creation and from even being creator in a sense. So there's a contradiction to this statement. How? The famous statement of the Zohar, which says, there is no knowledge, there is no thought that can grasp you. Well, mashman implication is that the creation cannot have the capacity to comprehend him may be blessed, but the knowledge or understanding. We just finished saying that the fact that God is creator and the fact that God animates all of existence is something you could understand and could know and ought to know, and faith is that which is beyond. But the Zohar just finished saying, we just quoted the Zohar which said that it's impossible for anyone to know God. So do you know him or don't know him? Even that level. There's nothing about God you can possibly comprehend. And at the same time we're saying that you could comprehend. So how does that work? It explains the different levels of comprehension. And this is where we talked about a couple days ago what the word das really means. Achini be'emes. But the truth is, ein mizar disaklal. There is no destruction to our words from this. V'akol emes v'yatziv, and it all lines up perfectly. V'hu, and this is, apim mashakasav Rambam, based on that which Rambam writes, shayibari yisparich, that the Creator, who hayadua mitziyusai, his being is known, v'loy mohosei, but not he himself is known. V'cheinu b'chosef emes, the same thing is true of all the books of emes, meaning referring to Kabbalah. Okay. What does this mean? Knowing his existence, but not knowing his being. What does this mean? V'ratzolemas means to say, shanachnu mitzad puloisav, us, based on what God does, creation, nedoshunim, so we know he exists. Avlenim akirim eichu mahu, but we don't know what he is. In other words, like this. And this, and he explains at length what this means, and we're not going to read the whole text, but the bottom line is like this. How do we say when you know that God, what's the knowledge a person has of God being creator? By analyzing myself. I see within myself that I have a metaphysical sentient nefesh that animates my life, and I look at the world as one big great body, and I see that there's a life that animates it, and if I must say it, there's an animator. So let's look at the nefesh now for a second. The analog. Do you know what the nefesh looks like? Can you say what the nefesh is? No. But you know it because you see its experience.
Yeah, the results.
The results. And that's the difference between Yediyas Mitzias versus Yediyas HaMahos. Yediyas HaMahos. Nobody said it's not mainstream. We're just learning. So should we close the book then?
Because I'm not saying this, everyone agrees with this.
Who said not?
Yeah.
Who said not?
There's no contradiction. Exactly.
So who said not?
We know as the Shem is one thing and the result is something.
Okay, we're learning, right?
Yeah.
Aren't we?
Yeah, sure.
So let's learn it. Okay, so it's obvious. So therefore.
Yeah, but this is this is like other the Ramban
and therefore.
They should quote them as well. They all say
and therefore.
No, they should quote them as well. They
all quoted. Read the text.
No, but this like here is
he just quoted the Rambam. Did he just quote the Rambam?
Yeah.
I don't understand what the problem is. We're learning it.
There's no problem.
No.
Back to the point here. Back to the point here. Back to the point here. Based on the Rambam, there's a distinction between Yediyas and Metzias and Yediyas and Mahos. Yediyas and Metzias means you know its existence. Yediyas and Mahos means you know it itself. So I'll give you an example. Right. I took a book and I went down to the hallway to the copy machine and I made a copy and brought it back to you, brought you a copy. So you see the copy, so you know there's a copy machine. Do you know the copy machine itself? No. You have no idea if I have a Linux or if I have, what's the other companies? Whatever the other companies are. You don't know because you never saw it. That's Yediyas and Metzias. You know its existence, but you don't know it. So when it comes to Hashem, it's the same thing is true. The fact that God is creator is true. It's a das, it's a knowledge, but it's a knowledge only because you see its results. So now, if you will, there's 3 levels, 3 layers here. What we see, what we observe, is the results of God bringing everything into being. And the result is animating everything. Level 1. As a result of that, we have Yediyas and Metzias. We know the existence of an animator. But that is still not faith. Even though you don't know it, but because you know its existence, it's not faith. Faith is that which you cannot say I understand or even know. And that's the key here. The Rambam doesn't say that the mitzvah is to understand God. He says to know God. And knowing means to know its existence. So where's the mitzvah of faith? Because there is a mitzvah of faith. In addition to the book of the Rambam, the book of laws, the Rambam writes the mitzvah is to know, and that is to know this, to know that there is an existence that brings the being, brings everything else, and animates everything, even though you don't know it, but you know it exists. You know it exists. Not necessarily do you understand it. You've never seen God, you've never seen your nefesh, but you know it exists. So you know that there's an animator, that's the mitzvah of Yediyah, but then there's a mitzvah of faith. And what's the mitzvah of faith? The mitzvah of faith is to know that God's beyond that, beyond creator. That is, what in the language of Kabbalah, sovev kol, that which transcends creation, and not just that which animates creation. Now, all of this is based on previous texts, as Rabbi Gimel likes to point out.
No, this is a bit of a chiddush. Explain it to you.
But here's and that's where I'm getting it. Now, here's the beautiful chiddush mitzvah tzedek.
That's a chiddush.
Here's the chiddush mitzvah tzedek. After all these texts, we're running out of time, but I don't want to read everything. 1 second, I'm sorry. We have to continue. Go to the next page.
Yes, that's the chiddush.
Go to the next page, and you're going to see I'm leading us to the chiddush mitzvah tzedek here.
Yes, that's the chiddush.
Va'ata yizbar. Now we can explain das moine ha-mitzvahs. The last line of the page here. Now we can explain.
That's the das and Amunah.
There we go. Now we can explain the opinion of those who count the mitzvahs. They have disputed in mitzvahs in lav whether the mitzvah of faith should be incorporated in the commandment or is an a priori to commandment. Right? We've discovered that.
Or even to explain the Rabbi himself.
One second. Now, one second. We're getting to all of this.
Yeah. That's
The das that we're getting. I've been building towards this, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The das bahag and the opinion of the bahag, as we said, is shalafi sheker inyan zeh, because this primary idea, yediyas elokus, the knowledge of God's existence, whom musig v'nirgish, even though you don't know, you've never seen God, you don't understand it, but it's intuitively felt and understood by dint of the fact that everything's being animated. So there's a knowledge that there's an animator, even if you've never met him.
Yeah, that applies to a believer.
Now, in Cain, one second.
The atheist will say, no, it's all the nature.
I'm going to answer that in a moment. In Cain, if so, while you're talking tzivah al zeh, there's no commandment on the Seder Bahag. Ki hatzivah ein neufel. The commandment only falls b'dover shesh b'bchira, in that which you have choice. In other words, you know there's a God. Now your choice is put on tefillin, don't put on tefillin. Right? But if the whole a priori is that there is a God, and you by observing your own life, and you see that there's a nefesh that animates it, and if you observe reality and you see that there's a nefesh that animates it, right? There's an animator to all of this existence. There's no commandment there. In Bedeus, and as the Rambam says that commandments are only on that which you have free choice. Either Bedeus, either you can make a false mistake and you have to choose the right way of thinking, like machshava or thought, v'dibur or speech, lachshev or lachshev, to think or not to think it, l'daber l'daber, to speak or not to speak it, speak lashon hara, don't speak lashon hara. Think you love God, don't think you love God. Lasses, do it, or la lasses, not to do it. Do put on tefillin, not put on tefillin. Avodavar morgish. But that which is intuitively felt and obvious in the way we observe our reality. Where's the commandment? To feel it, or to not feel it. It's already felt. It's already understood that there's an animator to creation.
If you're a believer, but that.
Let's go with this line of thinking.
Yeah,
on Orayim we see how Olam Chai, the world lives, the Kayim in its existence, Mechaya Chayim, from that which gives it and animates it. It's explained before in chapter 1. Therefore, in the Bahag's view, this wasn't counted in the minyan of the mitzvahs. Why wasn't it counted in the minyan of the mitzvahs? Because it's self-evident. It's self-evident that there's a creator which animates. You see an animated being, there must be an animator. Call it whatever you want. We like to use the word God, which gets back to what I began with in chapter 1. Before you talk about whether you believe in God or don't believe in God, let's first define God. In other words, if we described that there is an animating force to all of existence, even someone who's a naturalist would believe that that's true. He just won't call it God; he'll call it nature. So use another word. What's the difference? You're still believing in a supreme being that brings everything into being.
They don't believe that. They believe it's all totally random, like the Greeks.
Sorry?
They don't believe in a supreme being. They say
science today is not believing that it's random. On the contrary, they're further finding that there's connective tissue, and they're actually looking for they're all looking for the theory of one. Why are they all looking for the theory of one? On the contrary, they don't use the word God.
No, they just say it's all.
And they won't use the word supreme being. Yeah. They'll use the word nature, but they'll still agree that there is an energy that animates everything. They do believe that, and they're looking for it. That's what they're doing. When they're observing science, they're trying to find what's the one thing that animates all of being, which means
physical. They don't look at anything spiritual. Everything to them is in the physical world.
Call it whatever you. That's what I'm saying. Call it whatever you want. But everybody's looking. Even science is looking for what's the one animating factor. Okay, so you don't want to call it God. Don't call it God. Yeah. So I'm saying the word God is a question of definition. And if when you say I believe in God, automatically shuts down the conversation. We have to start with what's the definition of God. If the definition of God is the one animating factor of creation, of existence, or of nature, then the science will be, oh yeah, that's true, we believe that exists, and we're looking for it.
So the Big Bang idea.
So don't call it God, call it something else. But everybody acknowledges that because there's a world that's animated, there's an animating force. Don't call it God if you don't want to call it God, call it something else. And therefore, says the Bahag, that's not that can't be a commandment, because it's intuitively understood. On them, however, Harambam the Rambam, which says it is a commandment. V'siyaita and those that are with him, Rabbi Yoina v'siyaita and Rabbi Yoina and those who are with him, Shemonu zeh b'minyan mitzvahs, and did count, I am God your Lord, as one of the commandments, and not an a priori. Time on their reason is, the commandment is, al hamokas hadas, is on delving one's mind, v'azbarnus, and the contemplation, but davar zayadu, and this no matter, like the Abarbanel said. That the commandment is to spend the time to contemplate the truth of the one God you acknowledge already exists. Here's a commandment. You intuitively know that there's an animator. Fine. Now think about that. What are the applications of that? What does that mean to your life? How does that work? Even though you already intuitively know it exists. Even though it's already known to you. Nevertheless, if a person doesn't constantly spend time considering it, and distracts himself to think about other things, it's not going to help the fact that he already knew. Even to think about it in his thoughts, and just to kind of think about it in a cursory fashion, I think is the right way of saying it, it doesn't help. A person has to delve his mind deeply into this, dafka specifically. And then his emotions will open up. That's the second benefit. First of all, there's a commandment to spend the time to consider this fact that you know there's an animator. And number two, at least something else. Now your heart opens up to feeling for it because you thought about it. If it's just somewhere there and peripherally in your mind, it's not going to cause any emotional reaction. Of this we say, know today, take it to heart. Not just know cursorily, and also it's das. It's not understood because you understand it, but you know it intuitively, as we explained at length earlier. And therefore, the commandment is to consider and to contemplate that knowledge, and then that comes to heart. Now, that's Tzaddik adds another chiddush. This is kind of like the Abarbanel was saying, that the commandment is, well, it's actually a step further than the Abarbanel, or taking a step further. The Abarbanel is just to say that you know there's a commander, and the commandment is to know that he's the most perfect. It's not saying you already knew he's the most perfect. The commandment is now to analyze that, to think about that, to contemplate it. And then moreover, the Gamat Tzivoihu, and the commandment is as well, Al Halmon on the faith. What's the faith? On the transcendent level of godliness, which is not intuitively known. So it's two layers to the commandments about Tzemach Tzedek. And this is a historical chiddush. This is a historical chiddush. This is where we're going. On the one hand, the mitzvah is, like the Rambam says, let's read. Now, and this is what the Rambam writes in the book of mitzvahs, that the commandment is to have faith in God. But in the beginning of his book of laws, he says the mitzvah is to know that there is a primary being. So what's the deal? Is it commandment knowledge or the commandment faith? So there are two elements to the mitzvah. The kolab is a base varim, and therefore the commandment has two elements to it. Shehem, which they are yediyas mitzvosai, to know his being as the primary being and the creator, the animator of all creation. Hanoid the bedas, which is already known in your knowledge, and the commandment, as we said before, to spend time to consider it. And number two, v'gam amunaboy, and in addition to that, there's a faith, and the faith is in the level of divine transcendence, which is not intuitively known to you. And this was one commandment, to spend time considering God's animating force as creator, and as well to believe that he's transcendent. So in the Rambam, it's one mitzvah. But the Rabbeinu Yonah asked mitzvah to make two mitzvahs out of it. The mitzvah of faith and the transcendence from I am God your Lord. And mitzvah das, and the mitzvah of knowledge, to know that God's the animating creator. From the pasuk which says that you should know today. And then he goes on to explain some of this faith in Kabbalistic language, which we'll leave for now, and also Chakira, about God's knowledge and all that, and God's perfect unity and what this all means. But let's to recap and bring everything home. We had the Bahag, which says that the mitzvah to believe in God is not a commandment, not because it's not true, God forbid, but because it's an a priori. And therefore he's challenging all of those who include I am God your Lord as commandment number one to define what the commandment is. And therefore we had three different classic understandings of that. One was to know that the one God who commanded you, this is from the Smag, that the one God who commanded you is the same God who took you out of Egypt and the same God who created the world, and not to believe in polytheism. So meaning you might believe in a commander, but you might think he's one of many gods. One explanation. Another explanation is from the Smak, that the commandment is to believe that this God which created the world has not left the world on autopilot, but is involved in creation, and therefore the Torah and therefore God introduces himself as the one who took you out of Egypt, meaning to say, I created the world, true, and I'm currently involved in the world, which leads to the hope and the trust that God's going to further redeem us because he's involved in our life. Then number three, we had the Abarbanel, which said that the commandment is the God that you know, to know He's perfect. Comes to Tzedek and adds, the fact that God is perfect, you know already. The fact that God animates this world, you also know already. But that knowledge that God that animates the world is not a knowledge of understanding it. It's more of an intuitive knowledge. That's why it's das, knowledge versus bina versus understanding. It's intuitive. In the same way, intuitively, I know that I'm alive because there is an animating force within me. So I intuitively know that the whole world is alive because an animating force, call it God, call it nature, call it whatever you want. But we understand and we intuitively sense that there's an animating force that brings everything into being. And therefore says that Tzemach Tzedek, that can't be the commandment because you knew that already in the fact that there's a commander. You knew that already in the fact before. What's the commandment? Twofold. Number one, and either it's two mitzvahs like the Rabbi or it's one mitzvah like the Rambam. But the mitzvah is twofold. One is to contemplate and delve into the knowledge that you have, this intuitive knowledge that you have that God is animating everything, is to contemplate that, to think about it, and not just have it in peripheral knowledge. Think about it to the point that it actually stirs your heart to feel for it. Known in Chassidus as hisbonenus, contemplation. And the second element of the mitzvah is to have faith in that which is not intuitively known to you. Namely, that God is so transcendent that it's not just that the world relies on Him, but the world is nothing in the face of Him, like the ray of the sun before it even left the sun. Because God's transcendent from everything, and if He's transcendent, everything exists within Him. And it's not just that the world relies on Him as creator, but the world is actually completely subsumed and nullified within Him. Conjunctive, and maybe we take all beautiful ideas to heart, love Hashem, fear Hashem, and fulfill His commandment, and bring Mashiach without delay.